Shalom and good evening. Welcome. Just a friendly reminder to please mute yourselves if you haven't already. And we are ready to begin this evening's program. As Jeremy said, my name is Trudy Crames, and I'm the Senior Director of Programming here at Federation. And I am really thrilled to welcome you tonight. Before we jump into this evening's program, I wanted to share a quick overview of one of Federation's newest programs, Camp Marcy Lynn. It is especially near and dear to my heart. Camp Marcy Lynn will be a traditional Jewish day camp right here on we're all virtual, but it will be right there on the Larry and Mary Greenspan Family Campus for Jewish Life in Sarasota. It'll be a traditional day camp serving ages 5 to 14 years old. Camp Marcy Lynn will be an 8-week experience broken down into 4 two-week sessions. Each 2-week session will have a one-time only, not to miss special event, themed dress-up days, and much more exciting programming unique to each session. Some of the examples include carnivals, community service projects, and our soon-to-be famous color war, where the entire camp is split into teams for a multi-day competition in spirit, sports, and sportsmanship. Bragging rights also included. Other ideas feature Red, White, and Blue Day, Sports Team Day, and of course, Israel Day. This is the type of camp where campers will be mad at their parents, even if they think about scheduling a dentist or doctor appointment during camp days. The FOMO effect, or fear of missing out, will be real. Programming throughout the week will include arts and crafts, ceramics, STEM, cinema creation, drama games, theater performance, nature activities, camping skills, Israeli culture, and all kinds of sports. We'll have basketball and soccer, flag football, archery, frisbee golf, kickball, and a huge variety of tag games. Our counselors will even be creating new games that don't even exist yet, because we will be the trend-setting camp of the Sun Coast. So, for more information regarding Camp Marcy Lynn, please reach out to our newest staff member, Senior Director of Camp Marcy Lynn, Robbie Etzkin, and you can reach him at retzkin@jfedsrq.org or 941-552-6308. And I'll be happy to put that in the chat in case you want to mark it down for later. And especially for those of you grandparents out there, we will have options for your grandchildren when they come to visit you in the summertime. So keep that in mind. Second, I want to share with all of you, that Jeremy and Ted have put together an even more amazing series for 2021-2022 People of the Book, beginning in October. We have 20 events coming with 21 authors, 10 of which will be in person, and the other 10 will be via Zoom. So stay tuned for more information that'll be coming out in the next issue of the Jewish News. Okay, so now on tonight's main event and our special guest author. Esther Amini is a writer, painter, and psychoanalytic psychotherapist in private practice. Her recently released book entitled Concealed is her debut memoir. Kirkus Reviews selected and anointed Concealed one of the best books of 2020. Esther Amini's short stories have appeared in Elle, Lilith, Tablet, The Jewish Week, Barnard Magazine, TK University's Inscape Literary, Proximity, Paper Brigade, and Zibby Owens' anthology, Moms Don't Have Time To. She was named one of Aspen Word's Best Emerging Memoirists and awarded its Emerging Writer Fellowship in 2016 based on her memoir entitled Concealed. Her pieces have been performed by Jewish Women's Theater in Los Angeles and in Manhattan, and was chosen by JWT as their artist in residence in 2019. Chayflix, Jewish Netflix, is presently streaming an excerpt from Concealed called Amrika. Esther Amini lives in New York City with her husband. Also here tonight with us tonight to interview Esther is Angela Hensel, who was in Sarasota for our first season of People of the Book. Angela's memoir, A River Could Be a Tree, received the received the New York City Big Book Award for Memoir of 2019. Her Rockower award-winning column, Anjitepka, appeared weekly at Zeek.net. Anjitepka juxtaposed her current Jewish world of kosher Coke and Kabbalah on the Upper West Side of Manhattan with her fundamentalist Christian upbringing in Jasper, Indiana, as the seventh of 11 children waiting for Jesus to return. For tonight, please use the chat function to ask questions for Esther to answer after her interview. And now it is my pleasure to introduce both Esther Amini and Angela himself. Take it away.
Thanks so much. It's great to see everybody again. And Esther, as you know, I'm a huge fan of yours and I loved your book and I could certainly go on and on about it. Oh, Esther, I don't hear you. Are you muted?
No.
Oh, you're not. Okay, good. Good. Anyway, I know your book, but a lot of these people don't. So I thought maybe I would just ask you to say in your own words, like a little brief summary, and then I'm going to pounce on you with questions.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So I've written a memoir entitled Concealed. I have to give you a little background. I was born in New York unto Jewish-Iranian parents who came from the most fanatical Islamic city in all of Iran. That city is called Mashhad. Mashhad is a Shiite stronghold and pilgrimage site with a long history of maiming and massacring infidels. And an infidel is anyone who is not Muslim. 9th century Imam Reza is buried in Mashhad, which makes it holy ground. Millions of people from around the world pay homage on a yearly basis to Imam Reza in Mashhad. So it's phonetically Islamic, zero tolerance for anyone who is different, holiest city in Iran. And in this city, my parents lived with a small, tight-knit Jewish community. And they lived as underground Jews. They lived as crypto Jews because there was no way to survive and show who you truly are. So this went right through the middle of the 20th century. So they had to pretend they were Muslim. They had to pretend they were other than who they were. So it was a life of duplicity and a life of paranoia. Right after World War II, they came to the United States. My parents, actually it was my mother who decided she was going to yank the family out of Iran and bring them to New York. At the time, my brothers were very, very young. I have 2 brothers. I was not born yet. And it was quite an exodus, and I write all about it. There's a lot of humor and drama in this story. And they finally make it to New York, and a few years later, I'm born. So the backdrop is very important because I'm born caught between 2 opposing cultures and 2 opposing parents. There's Iran, diametrically opposite to America, and my mother, who was verbal, rebellious, irreverent, I would say at times dangerously irreverent. And there was my father, who was very withdrawn, quiet, a man of silence, who did not enjoy being with people. She was highly social and who held on tenaciously to the values of Mashhad. My ancestors came from Mashhad. We date back to Iran, prior to that to Persia, 2,700 years. So Iran was very much in his bloodstream, and he held on tightly to everything that he was raised on. And so it was difficult because I was the 3rd child, the youngest, the only one born in America, the only girl, and I had to find my way through, to navigate through in order to reap the benefits of America and also hold on to my parents who, well, my father in particular, who really hated the United States and praised Iran and saw this country as immoral, unethical, corrupt, noxious, and wanted to protect me from America. So that's the book in a nutshell, how I traveled through and how I came out the other end and became who I became.
That is the story, and that is a fascinating story. So, Esther, I came from, as you know, a very fundamentalist Christian background, and you did not, and yet I really identified with your memoir, and I think that a lot of people are going to identify with it, where Ashkenazi Jews, whatever, converts like me, and I think that really speaks to the writing itself and that empathy and your ability to kind of tell universal truths. So I insisted that Esther send me some photos so I could do a PowerPoint. Actually, full disclosure, my daughter did a PowerPoint because I'm incapable. So I am now going to share my screen and share some of those with you because I think you're going to find it as fascinating as I do. This is the book, obviously. And we're going to go to the next one. I hope. Oh, what happened? Ugh. Okay, there we go. Can you guys all see it? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We have the map in
Okay.
front of us.
Okay, great. So Esther mentioned that Mashhad, and I just wanted to point out where Mashhad is on this map. It's up here, a town that, it's not a town, it's a big city apparently, but none of us have heard about it because of Tehran and others. And so that's where it is. Her family, as she mentioned, that's her mother who got married when she was 14 to her father who was 34. And that's also just a fascinating relationship, and your explanation and the way you handle this mismatch is just so beautiful. Esther's mother, the title is called Concealed, obviously, and part of the concealing was she had to wear the Chador, and that's Esther's mother wearing the Chador in Iran. And her family had been in Iran, obviously, for a long, long time. This is her grandfather and grandmother. Her grandmother was 9 when she married her grandfather, who was 29, Tuti, and her husband. This is Esther's great-grandfather, who was a very, successful merchant, I believe, in Iran. Esther mentioned that her mother wanted to go to America and wanted a new start, and she wanted a daughter. And so they went to the tomb of Esther in Iran, and she prayed, and this is the tomb of Esther in Iran. They prayed for a daughter, and prayers are sometimes answered. So Esther was born in America, and there she is. There's a little flag here somewhere.
Oh, the first photo had the.
Oh, it was the first one. Okay, got it. So this is Esther's kind of backdrop of being between the two worlds, like she talked about, between Iran and the New World. There was this one scene that I just loved in the book. There's so many, by the way, that I can't just pick one. But one of them was the Purim scene, in which Esther really wanted to be a nurse or something like that, and her mother made her dress up as the Bukharian shepherd, and there she is. And guess what? She won the Purim contest. So there you go. Esther, I love this picture of you. Esther is the first woman to go to college, and this is Esther at Barnard, I believe, with your mother, right?
Well, the previous picture by myself.
One was Barnard, right? And this is with Mom. And by the way, Esther's mother is such a character. I just loved her so much. And there's so many reasons to read this book. But honestly, just to get to know Esther's mother and her father is certainly one of them. Anyway, that's just a brief kind of photographic kind of look at your background. And I think that anybody looking at you right now today would not exactly guess that these are your ancestors. So I'm just going to ask you the most obvious, basic question. Yeah. Why did you decide to write a memoir?
That's a very important question. I come from a long legacy of concealment. Not only did my mother wear the black chador, which is the Persian word for burqa, not only did she wear the burqa and look through eye slits and pretend she was Muslim when she stepped out of the home, but she also was not allowed to learn to read and write. And back then, and this is just mid-20th century, we're not talking thousands of years ago, in the city of Mashhad, girls were kept illiterate and married at very young ages, as Angela pointed out. My grandmother at 9, my mother at 14, and that was the norm. That was the cultural norm. So if girls were kept illiterate, no way could they write their story down. You know, they didn't have diaries tucked under their pillows. And the men, because they were pretending to be other than who they were pretending to be Muslim, they also were not holding on to journals and writing their authentic selves and allowing themselves to be transparent because they would endanger themselves and their lives and their families and their children. So since I am first generation American, the bridge between my parents who lived that story and that next generation, my children who were second generation American, I really felt an obligation to give voice to those who could not tell their tale. So it was to break the silence. It was to defy Mashhad that prohibited them to really speak their truth, to give voice to those who are not allowed to have a voice, and also to thread the Mashhadi story, the story of the Jews from Mashhad, into the larger Jewish tapestry, because so many don't know about them. You know, you say Moranos of Spain, people nod. You say the Jews of Mashhad, they look at you blankly. And it's equally fascinating as to how this community survived generation after generation and held tightly to Judaism and did not assimilate. And so I also, I mean, those are many reasons. There is a far more personal reason, one where I felt the need to write the story in order to make sense out of all the confusion. You know, growing up, it was a very confusing experience in the household, outside of the household. So to resurrect their history, to rescue them from obscurity, and to make sense out of the chaos.
Many, many good reasons. By the way, I mentioned your book to a friend of mine not that long ago, and I said she's you know, an Iranian Jew, she's Mizrahi, and they said, "What do you mean Mizrahi?" And I said, "Mizrahi, she's a Mizrahi Jew." Sephardic. And I said, no, she's not Sephardic, she's Mizrahi. And this is a good Ashkenazi Orthodox friend of mine, and she honestly did not know that term. And I felt so proud of myself for being able to educate somebody. I know, but you know, so I wanted just to talk about those different worlds that you lived in, and specifically, you know, you talked about your father and how he kind of didn't really let go of Iran, obviously. So in what ways did he kind of schlep Iran over here and inflict it upon you in some sense? I don't really know what that kind of exchange was like.
He really was a wonderful man. He was a very honest man. He was a man of integrity, and his intentions were pure.
Right.
As a child, I didn't understand any of this. So, you know, I write through the eyes of a child, of a pre-adolescent, of a teenager, later a young adult, and eventually a married woman with children of my own. But my take on him kept changing because it was very hard for me when I was young to understand. As an adult, I can tell you today, he lived that Mashhadi life. And what he knew was that girls should not learn to read and write, and that they should remain illiterate, because when you marry them off at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, you want them to move into their in-law's house, which is what would happen, grow up with the in-law, adapt to their husband, be deferential, and create harmony, know how to create harmony. And the whole idea of literacy in that culture was that literacy is going to actually make you highly opinionated and controversial, and you are going to be argumentative. So it's best not to learn to read and write, not to get involved with books, and books offer ideas, other ways of thinking, other ways of being. So he really opposed books as well, especially when it came to me, not so much with my older brothers, but as a girl, he felt that I should be sheltered. And so there was that. There was also the feeling that I should marry young. He didn't expect me to marry at the age of 9 like his mother did, but he certainly felt by the age of 15 in America, 16, I should be married. So this was difficult for me. You know, I was born in Kew Gardens. I was raised in Kew Gardens, Queens, and then we moved to Forest Hills, and I'm going to public schools, and I have American friends, and I want to read books, and I do not want to get married at the age of 16. And I begin to realize that I have aspirations of my own, and I do want to read, and I do want to know ideas, and I do want to think, and I do want to examine and explore, and yet it was forbidden. So all of this had to be done in secret.
So I want to go back to the book thing in a second, because this is called, obviously, The People of the Books. So it is all about how important books are, and we all are on the same page there. But the other thing that struck me about your father, I mean, your parents were such polar opposites, but your father was this man of silence. And you know, painful. You know, there's so many things that one can talk about in terms of the fact that you became a psychoanalyst and it's all about talking, and your father was this, he really didn't want to talk, and he didn't want you to talk. And there was a passage in the book, and I think it was on page 26, and I asked you to keep your book near you, so I hope you did. Yeah. And I just, okay, good. And I wanted to know if you'd just read a bit from it, because I think I'd love to hear the author's voice in talking about Dad.
All right, this is about silence.
Right.
And as a result, you know, my mother was not silent. She was outspoken and irreverent. But my father, when he was home, we would try to abide by his rules. And so I write about silence here. It's silence took root in me, and my need for solitude grew. On my 8th birthday, my eldest brother, Albert, bought me an easel, palette knife, canvas boards, tubes of Grumbacher oil paint. From then on, I spent Sundays in my room with alizarin crimson, burnt umber, Indian yellow, and phthalo blue. After mixing fleshy heaps of pigment, I'd scoop, fling, and scrape, leaving behind Mom, Pop, PS 99, and any need for friends. I sailed into zones of shrieking colors that couldn't be heard by anyone other than me. Each hue had a breath, pulse, and tongue of its own. In this soundless space, my paints spoke loudly, and I listened intently, dabbling in portraits and landscapes, but preferring to lose myself in blissful, freedom-finding abstracts. I discovered I didn't want to put the world into words, that not every sensation had a matching name. Not every image or impulse could be explained. I began to believe that spoken language was artificial, formulaic, forcing me to shoehorn feelings into sentences while losing so much in translation. I preferred the primal feel of paint. Paint that sang, cried, and killed. Paint that said, I'm not rational, not civilized, not neatened up. I'm straight from the gut, muddy and messy. You can't tell me who I am. I'll tell you. I studied hard, did well in school, but struggled with an undisclosed secret. Words did not come easily. They came out backwards, in the wrong order, haltingly. I had to fight hard to retrieve a word, to verbalize thought, to translate flutters of feeling into language. My innards had potholes that swallowed up nouns, verbs, and adjectives before I could reach them. Words felt like little rebels, fugitives on the run, each with a warring will of its own. They made their own decisions, whether to stay or scram, help me self-express or leave me tongue-tied. And so I thought and spoke in shades of color.
I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that that is also a big part of your identity today as an artist. I mean, you've been able to integrate both the words and. It's not either or, it's and I love that. I really do. I'm going to go back though to the book thing, since this is our focus, obviously. And I mean, your book is called Concealed, and it's obvious that there's many things that are concealed here. We're not just talking about concealing your Jewishness in Iran. There's different ways of concealing one's self, one's true, authentic self. And your book is a lot about coming to reveal, actually, oneself as opposed to concealing it. But one thing you had to do was you had to conceal that you loved to read. And your father, there was his line in the book, I wrote it down, was, books are evil, they poison girls' minds. I mean, it was really just so harsh. It wasn't just like, I don't like them. It's like, no, this is like Satan, basically. So you talk about being a booklegger, which I love that word, by the way. I love that pun. So I wanted just to talk to you about what it was like to kind of have these dual lives, this life in which you had these aspirations to read, to paint, to do all this stuff, but you had to conceal it.
Well, at the time it was difficult.
Right.
Looking back, I think it was growth promoting in many, many ways. But at the time, I used to hide books under my coat and bring them upstairs into my bedroom and then hide them under the bed. And at night, read with a flashlight in hand under the sheets, very frightened that my father might catch me. If he walked in and saw that I was reading, he would have a meltdown. And the reason was he felt, again, during childhood, I didn't understand this. I just wrote him off as crazy. But from this perspective, as an adult, I really do understand what was happening. And for him at that time, he had two very strong feelings. One is that the brain is a male organ. And the more you develop that brain and become more of an intellectual, the more masculine you become. And consequently, no man is going to want to marry you. And these are thoughts that stem from Mashhad. This is another import of his. As an American girl at the age of 7, 8, 9, I didn't know what he was talking about, and also, he also felt that books have ideas in them that will undermine his authority. And he isn't so far off, because when you read, you are being exposed to other ways of thinking, other ways of living, other ways of interpreting life and making other choices. So he was very afraid of that influence, that it would undermine his authority, the law and order in his home, the way I grow up and who I become, and felt that if he could keep it all out of the home. He could somehow get me to arrive at a particular place where I marry the right person, and I have a family of my own, and I have children, and I create a harmonious life within the home. So this was formulaic. This was very much the way he was raised, the way his parents and grandparents were raised, and he felt America did not work. Like he would watch and say, 50% ends up in divorce. He was horrified. Divorce was unheard of in the Mashhadi community, regardless of whether people were getting along or not, they stayed together. He felt there was no family life in America. You know, people weren't eating dinner together at the same time. Some were, many weren't. Family life was very, very important to him. He felt there was no respect for elders in America. And respect is very, very important in the Persian culture. So there was a lot that he found fault with and did not want me to become American while I was growing up in America.
Right. And you know what's funny is even though my father was not at all from Mashhad and had a very different, he actually would have liked your father. He had a lot of the same views, quite frankly. And there's probably a lot of us here who grew up thinking, yeah, 50% divorce rate, not good. We don't like that either. But I get it. He wanted what he believed was the best for you. His intentions, as you say, were pure. So I wanted to go to Mom one more time because we've talked about your dad and your parents were such diametric opposites. I mean, he was 20 years older than your mother, poor thing, and so different. And so you do talk about, the things that you sort of got from both sides, as we all do. There's a little bit of mom, a little bit of dad, maybe a little bit of grandma tossed in here and there. So when you think about it, what do you think you kind of got from both parents, and how did that affect how you told this story? Did you tell it kind of like mom would tell the story, or dad, or as Esther would tell the story?
Well, I told it as Esther would tell the story. So it is a memoir, so it has to really be through my lens. And again, it's through that young child. I have very early memories. And so I go back to those earliest memories and how I perceived, and later how I spoke and how I did not speak and how I felt internally, moving right along through adolescence and adulthood. So it is through my lens. I do feel I contain both of them in me, and I enjoy having both of them in me. My father was an introvert. I have that. There's a big slice of me that is an introvert. I enjoy silence. I enjoy time alone. I enjoy, well, when you're painting, you're with yourself and it is quiet. There is no language, any auditory language. There is a visual language, which is silent. And when I'm writing, I'm in a space of silence and aloneness. And that, I think my comfort with all of that has to do with having had a father who promoted silence and revered soundlessness. As for my mother, she was quite a force to contend with. And at times I found her comical. At times I found her heroic. She was unpredictable and a rebel at the core. I think the part of her that I have internalized is the defiance. She was highly defiant. And I don't think I'm defiant the way she was, because she was impulsive. I think just writing this book was an act of defiance. And I think that's where it comes. I did access her. I accessed her strength and her ability to dismiss outside voices and to just stay focused on what she feels and what she needs to do. And that's what I did when I was writing the book. I didn't want to be in any way censored. And so that comes from Mom. So I can see each of them contributing to who I am.
I certainly see that. So Esther, I think that people are going to want to ask questions, but I'm going to ask you one more question, even though I have quite a few others. But I wanted to talk one more time about books, since this is kind of what we're talking about. That, you know, that they were evil and you weren't going to be marriageable if you became literate and so on. And you talk about feeling silenced as a child, but the more, you quote, the more I read the voice of others, the more I had an urge to use mine. And your very last line of your memoir, and absolutely no spoilers here, and I love this last line, there's nothing more dangerous than a girl with a book. So what does it mean to you, having written a book, and it's come out now, and you've heard your voice and you've spoken out both in the book and in interviews like this? So what does it mean now to you to have written this book, given, I mean, are you very dangerous now? Is that what you think?
I am very dangerous now. It was quite a process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean the writing process. I mean the emotional experience of going against these principles. And of course, I've been reading books my entire life, but to write one, you empower yourself. There's no question. And it's now your voice coming out. And I had demons swimming around in my head. No one from the outside world. They were all internal demons forbidding me. And it really felt like it was the voice of Mashad saying, you know, you are going to suffer. There's going to be severe consequences. You will not live to see the day that this book comes out, because there's been so much concealment and there's been so many prohibitions against women from the city of Mashhad who were Jewish and pretending to be Muslim. I mean, there's a whole layering here, and who did not express themselves authentically. And so to break that pattern, to defy that history, even though rationally I know, of course I can do it, women write in America. But I wasn't living just in America. You know, psychologically, half of me was, Mashhad was thumping in my brain as well. So it felt like I conquered those voices. I conquered that fear, which is very, very important. And that's on a private level. On a more public level, so many people have reached out to me after reading the book and told me what the book means to them and how inspirational, how they laughed and they cried at the same time, and how they saw parts of themselves in the book. I found this astounding because I thought the book was so idiosyncratic to who I am, a background that I thought no one has the way I had it. You know, my parents were very unusual also for that community. And yet I was told over and over again by strangers reaching out to me from all over the world that they felt heard and understood through my book, and they felt fortified and somehow inspired. And that has been really rewarding, because when I wrote, I was not thinking of them. I was thinking of the story, and I felt compelled to push that story out, not knowing where it would land or how people would receive it. So it's been very gratifying, and certainly one of the highlights of my life, no question.
That's great. And, you know, I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, that I'm one of those admirers who identified with it, even though we couldn't have had more different backgrounds. And I think that that is a testament to how, you know, how gifted you are as a writer, as a storyteller, of being able to transcend the specific and to kind of relate to all of us just in a very kind of human to human way. I want to make one last point before I open it up to questions. And I see that we're getting some questions already. But Esther's book is so funny. It sounds like when we're talking here, we sound so serious and we sound like, ooh, Mashad and this and that. And yes, there's serious things in it, but I just want to make it clear there are truly some very funny moments in there. Were you aware of how funny they were at the time? Or like when you were writing this, did you think, oh my heavens, that was funny?
Well, as a child living through the experience of
Not funny.
pretending that she owned a boutique in Tehran and she busts her way into Oscar de la Renta's showroom and does a whole number there so she can buy the gowns at rock bottom price and then becomes a steady customer. And I'm standing next to her, horrified at the time, feeling that we're going to be handcuffed and jailed. No, I didn't find it funny.
It's one of the funniest scenes. There's so many funny scenes. Let's not spoil them, but there were so many.
But when I wrote about it, you know, right. It was side splitting. And so I needed the distance in order to laugh.
Right. I know. Parents tend not to be very amusing when you're growing up with them, I have to say, from personal experience. And I think I'm very funny, but my kids don't seem to think I'm that funny. We're going to open it up to questions. And I think that Trudy is going to be...
Oh, it's actually me. It's back to Jeremy.
Jeremy. Okay.
Yes, it's back to Jeremy. That's what I get paid for. Another person just wants to come in and they're still joining. But okay, so Peter Kretzmer in the chat asks, it looks like Esther's family went to synagogue or at least gathered with other somewhat observant Jews while in Iran. How was this done in a way that maintained secrecy? Once in America in Queens, did Esther's parents join the synagogue and live publicly as Jews? Did they mix with non-Iranian Jews? Was this more important to her dad, his Iranian background, or his Jewishness?
Lots of questions in one paragraph.
He's very bright. That's why.
Okay.
Thank you.
They're good questions. Going back to Iran, you know, they lived, as I said, as crypto Jews, as underground Jews. So no, they were not walking off to synagogue. There was no synagogue. What they did was they had these tunnels. They lived in a ghetto called Eidgah, and they had tunnels where they could go into each other's homes without having to step outside. And they'd form a minyan, and the men would get together and they would daven, they would pray together. Quietly, but there was no public synagogue. And I do write about this. When they came to the United States, there is quite a poignant story about how my father was very eager to go to an above ground shul and bring my two brothers at the time, 5 and 8 years old, to this shul. They were living on the Upper West Side. They found a 1-bedroom rental, and there was a synagogue just a few blocks away. And they went. That's a story of its own. I'm not going to spoil what happened, but there's a surprise ending to that. To answer the question, once they settled in Queens, they bought a house and they lived in Kew Gardens. They attended an Ashkenazi synagogue, and they always did from then on. Again, in the 1950s, you have to remember that time. Some of you perhaps were not born yet. In the 1950s, there were Ashkenazi synagogues. They didn't have Sephardic synagogues and Mizrahi synagogues. It was Ashkenazi, and that the expectation was that everyone go there, and that's what they did. And they were fine with it. A few Meshadi families began to move in. They all lived near each other, and there were maybe 6 families, then there were about 8 families. They were pioneers. This is 1947 when they arrived in America, way before the Khomeini Revolution. And they all attended the same Kew Gardens Ashkenazi synagogue. So that's what we always did.
I have some questions for you. I've been writing down and some people have emailed me. In Iran, did you keep kosher? Did your parents keep kosher? Is there?
Yes.
As crypto Jews?
Yes. You know, what they did was my father was a shochet, and he knew how to slaughter chickens kosher style. The young boys were trained by the time they were of bar mitzvah age. They were taught by their fathers. So that was something very important that they had to learn to do. The women would go into the marketplace, buy their fruit and vegetables, and sometimes buy meat that was not kosher. And when no one was looking, they'd walk down through alleyways and they'd just throw it out for dogs to gnaw at, or give to they had people working for them, or give to their servants, and they would not eat it. And so they made a lot of meals that were dairy, and they made a lot of meals with chicken and fish, and they kept kosher. They were in today's terms, because in Iran, they didn't have Orthodox conservative reform. They didn't have these divisions. But in today's terms, they would be called Orthodox Jews.
Another question is, when your grandmother of 9 married her husband 29, was there a matchmaker? How were these marriages arranged?
That's a good one too. I write about that. They were expected to marry their first cousins. So there was a lot of first cousins marrying first cousins. And when a child was born, Tuti, my grandmother, for example, she was placed in a little crib, and she was quickly assigned to my grandfather, who was 20 years older. And eventually she married him, and they were first cousins. My parents were not first cousins, and that's another rebellious act. The first and last rebellious act my father ever took, because he was very conventional, but he was the one who said, I'm not going to marry my first cousin. The rest of them, most of them did. I don't have to tell you, it does lead to problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did when you moved to the States with your parents, did your mother work?
I didn't move to
You were born here. I know. I'm sorry. You were born here. Right. Did your mother work? Was she a housewife, or what? She sounds like such a strong woman.
She was, and she did not work the way in the way in which you mean work. She ran the home. She cooked, she cleaned, she shopped. When they first arrived, they did not have money. It was very difficult. The beginnings were very difficult. And there was a lovely woman who lived in their apartment building. This is when they were first on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And she spoke to my mother. Somehow they communicated. And she wrote a little note that my mother could offer her services in the building as a babysitter, as a seamstress. She doesn't speak English, but her work is very good. And so my mother was doing that. And my father was trying to make a living. I mean, that's a big story of its own, because he struggled. It was quite 2 years of not being able to pull in money. And we had a lovely neighbor, Jewish-American neighbor, who would loan my father money, who just believed in him. And at some point, should I give this away, Angela? At some point, my father had an idea, and he used to own farmlands. He knew goats very well, and he knew that there was a soft, fuzzy hair that grows under the spiky hair. He had a friend send him from Iran a little sample of that fluffy hair. Long story short, he introduced it to a mill. They turned it into cashmere, and he was one of the first to bring cashmere into the United States during the 1950s, when cashmere became the craze. And movie stars were wearing it.
Thank you, Lana Turner.
Department stores had it behind their front windows. Everyone had to have a cashmere coat, a cashmere scarf. And so he did very well for a number of years, and then he sunk again. So the story, there are lots of ups and downs, but he was the breadwinner.
So one last question I'm going to ask, then I'll open it up to everybody else. I'm sorry for being so controlling, but you all know me. When your brothers got married, did they choose their wives, or was it somewhat prearranged?
No, they chose their wives.
Okay.
Wow.
So now I would like to open it up. If you have a question, please. Esther, I think you're an amazing person. I am enjoying tonight so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
I have a question. You
Okay.
said that you weren't very verbal, but how did you do in school?
Well, I think I just read you a paragraph where I said I did very well in school because I was a hard worker. You know, I took it very seriously. Maybe I put in triple the time that another youngster would put in because my brothers did phenomenally well in school, and I wanted to be equal to them, and I wanted to be just like them. I mean, they play a very big part in the book as well. They were role models. They were phenomenal brothers, and they shared with me their lives and their privileges, their passions, and through them, I really found my way. So because I wanted to do well in school, I worked very, very hard. But it did not come easy. It was hard. And I think growing up in silence played a very big role.
Are your parents alive now?
No. Let's see, my mother passed away 21 years ago, and my father passed away 25 years ago.
Thank you.
The one question I forgot to ask is, what type of art do you paint? I wish you would have included some of your art in the PowerPoint, because I'm dying to see what you paint.
All you have to do is Google me, and I have a site where I do exhibit my paintings. They're oil paintings. They look very, how would I describe them? They're biomorphic shapes. They're abstracts, three-dimensional biomorphic shapes. And what I try to do is access the subconscious. So it is stuff that comes out that you can't quite articulate.
Okay.
They also have a very beautiful surface. So they're very engaging and confusing as well.
Well, I look forward to it. Any more questions for Esther? I'm going to stop.
I have one more.
Okay.
I'm going to persist. Esther, thank you very much. What was more important? Your father seems very interesting to me. Since he was so disciplined in his way of living, was it his Iranian background that was more important, or his Jewishness?
Oh, his Judaism, for sure. He was a deeply committed Jew in a very quiet way. He would not beat his chest. He would not profess to know it all. His greatest pleasure, and if you read the book, you'll see, his greatest pleasure was to climb into his bed, close the door, and read his Torah. You know, he had the Bible in Farsi. He had the Jewish Bible, the Torah, translated in Farsi, and he loved reading it in Farsi. And he would at times quote from it, but he had a very strong identification, a Jewish identification, which affected me profoundly. It was not so much that he would preach. He wouldn't preach. It was his behavior that captivated me, you know, and made me realize he's deeply grounded in Judaism. So that is definitely number one. But in terms of how do you raise your children? Mm-hmm. What do you expect of a female, a wife, a daughter-in-law? What is the role of a woman? Those things came directly from Iran.
Mm-hmm. And after all, Jews lived well in Iran for a long time.
Depends on which city, and I think that also needs to be highlighted. You know, if you meet someone who says, I came from Tehran, totally different story. Totally. They lived above ground, the Jews. The girls were all educated. Many of them who came from affluent families were sent to Swiss boarding schools. They went off to the Sorbonne in Paris. It was a whole different ball of wax. And at this very same time, we're saying the 1950s, very same time in Mashhad, girls were kept illiterate, married at the age of 9, 10, 11, and could not open a book. So it depends on what city you're talking about.
Thank you. That's great. Amazing.
Esther, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. You have been just a joy, and the information you've told us about is amazing. And I hope everybody, I put it in the chat, will purchase Esther's book.
Yes.
And there's also, there, you got it. And then there is also a site to leave a review after you read the book. And Angela, I want to thank you so much for being here also. This has been an extraordinary evening for us. And truly, truly thank you. Thank you all for being here. And it's everything I thought it would be. And I appreciate it. It
was an honor and a pleasure. And I want to thank Angela for being such an exceptional interviewer, spot on questions. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Great to see everybody again.
Okay, everybody have a wonderful evening. Be well, be safe. And until we meet again. Get your new books out. Call me when you do. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody unmute and thank everybody. Absolutely. This has been
Thank you,
an
Angela.
amazing evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Night, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.